To conclude our second session of speakers and performers, please welcome Zoha Bharwani from the International Academy Bloomfield with Out of Touch.
Start by asking you all to reflect on a few questions before I share a few of my thoughts and experiences with you today. Can you remember the last time you cried? What about the last time someone cried in front of you? When were you most deeply hurt emotionally? When was the last time you felt complete ecstasy or joy? When were you most angry? Did you react to that anger? And were there any consequences? Now, for some of us, answers to these questions come easily. However, most of us have to dig a little bit deeper to put ourselves in touch with those emotions. I fall into the second category of individuals. It's often been very difficult for me to open up to people around me and often even to myself. However, the few times that I have allowed myself to feel something deeply have been incredibly rewarding, and I'd like to share those with you. In 2010, I visited a camp for flood victims in Pakistan. While I was there, I had the chance to interview a father. He spoke to me about his gratitude of his family's safety, but also told me about some of the effects he'd had to face since having to leave his home. Amongst these, he mentioned his fear of impending homelessness, inability to care for his family, and unemployment. He also talked about some of the other effects of the floods, such as the epidemic waterborne diseases, the carcasses of the drowned animals, and the destruction of the farmland and infrastructure. Despite all of these, the tragedy he worried most about was how this displacement would affect his children's education. He told me that he hated that his children's time was just being wasted when they could have been off learning something. He told me his best attempts to find an instructor for his children were to no avail. He felt that he, as a farmer, was nothing more than a man confined to poverty when his crops and livestock were destroyed. But it didn't have to be this way for his children, for if they had access to education, they could be successful anywhere in the world. Through this single interaction, this father changed my perspective of the life I lived. I realized I took for granted the education that not everyone is fortunate enough to have. I decided to start a charity called After Catastrophe, and a niche organization I hoped would help bring access to education or the opportunity to continue education for children affected by natural disasters, regardless of their socioeconomic statuses or backgrounds or hardships. Now, I never found this father again, and he doesn't know how much he's motivated me to dedicate my time, my emotion, my energy into ensuring that other people don't have to go through what he had to endure. However, I've been left with the knowledge that he was able to change my perspective because I let him. I could have shelved that conversation away somewhere deep in my subconscious and never thought about it again. But he impacted me because I let myself be impacted. I let myself be vulnerable to that experience. I let it make me feel sad, upset, angry, but also fortunate and grateful. Now, what's interesting is that what I learned through this experience has actually been proven through scientific research on emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence, as defined by the researchers Peter Salovey of Yale University and John D. Mayer of the University of New Hampshire, is the ability to monitor one's own and others' feelings and emotions, to discriminate among them, and to use this information to guide one's thinking and actions. The two researchers go on to conceptualize the scope of emotional intelligence in the following tree diagram. And the path I want to focus on is the one that reaches motivation through utilization of emotion. Now, my vulnerability during that conversation I had with that father allowed me to feel emotions that I was able to use then as motivation to come up with a possible solution for the problem of the lack of education of disaster victim children. Now, science tells us that when we make a conscious attempt to approach situations with emotional intelligence, we are at an advantage to solving problems adaptively. But what about the times when we don't consciously want to act with emotional intelligence? Can our reluctant or unwilling vulnerability still allow us to grow as human beings? About 6 or 7 years ago, I visited my great-grandmother in a nursing home. It was the first time I'd visited a nursing home that I was old enough to actually fully understand the situations of the people and my surroundings. I won't go into that story too much, but I left knowing that I never wanted to see another senior home or see another senior citizen ever again. I avoided old people like the plague, and I know completely irrational, but tell that to my 10-year-old self. Anyway, 2 years ago, I attended a youth camp in Nairobi, Kenya, where we were all assigned to different service sites, 5 of them being orphanages and schools, and 1 of them being a nursing home. And as luck would have it, guess which one I was assigned to? The first day I walked into that nursing home, I was absolutely petrified. The more I tried to distance myself from the discomfort I felt of being surrounded by old people who could barely remember their own names, the more I could feel it creep up everywhere around me. I tried to push away the discomfort, the fear, but it just kept coming, and eventually it enveloped me. It reached a peak as I watched an old lady with Alzheimer's cry out in pain as she was slipping off her wheelchair. Eventually, I kind of just imploded and burst into tears as I imagined the day that my parents, my grandparents, everyone I knew, and eventually I myself would end up just like her. With the help of my camp counselors, though, I was able to realize that it's okay to fear the future and fear the unknown, for that's what makes me so appreciative of the present. It's okay to be afraid or feel bad for other people because that's what makes me recognize the impact that I have the potential to make on their lives in the present. Now, I could have shelved that conversation away, like I said, with that father at the flood victim camp, but I willingly allowed it to impact me instead. And I tried to push away those emotions that I felt at the senior home, but unwillingly I allowed them to impact me as well. And whether I like it or not, these experiences have forced me to see that we are faced with the opportunity to make an impact or have an impact made on us every single day. Now, in today's world, it's so much easier to numb our feelings than it is to accept and express them. It's easier to scroll past the stories on Facebook or the pictures on Instagram that reveal injustices occurring around us, and instead catch up on the latest celebrity gossip. It's easier to flip to another reality TV show than it is to watch a documentary on Catastrophe. It's easier to build a wall and prevent someone from hurting us than it is to love unconditionally. It's easier to live in ignorance of the change that we have the potential to make than it is to recognize our obligation and our responsibility to our world. However, when we let our guard down and we allow ourselves to be impacted by someone or something, we become sensitive to the impact that we have the potential to make as well. Since then, I've gone on to volunteer and conduct sing-alongs at senior homes here in Michigan, where I try to bring the joy that music has brought me to the residents of senior homes here. Now, each of us is given the capacity to feel deeply, but it's whether or not we use that capacity to benefit one another that's up to us. It's whether or not we choose to be vulnerable to our emotions once in a while, whether or not we choose to let our emotional intelligence reign, that determines how we act or react, what impression we make on one another, and most importantly, whether or not we are able to feel the human connection between us. Thank you.
That will conclude our second session of speakers. Once again, we will have a 15-minute break before our final session begins, and we encourage you all to continue sharing ideas with those around you and participate in lobby activities. We will see you in 15 minutes.